my responsibility is to give us a perspective of the mission harvest in Africa. But I want to begin by attempting to put Africa in the context of world mission. And permit me to just make a slight adjustment to the topic, as I believe that God has placed Africa in the history of his mission at this particular time in a very strategic way. I want to begin by suggesting, in the words of one of my mentors, Andrew Wars, who once said, Christian faith is missionary both in its essence and in its history. He went on to say, new Christian lands emerge, replacing the old and shifting the Christian center of gravity as drastically as it had shifted after AD 70. Let me repeat the second quote. New Christian lands emerge, replacing the old and shifting the Christian center of gravity as drastically as it had shifted after AD 70. Today, friends, statisticians who have taken interest in the trends of mission tell us that Christians by continent in 2020 showed that there is about 67% of all Christian believers are to be found in the global south, 33% in the global north. This is 2020. In 1900, 100 years ago or more, the statistics were different. There was 82% of Christians in the north and only about 18% in the global south. In Africa alone, we have about 667 million Christians. The Lord has taken his mission from Israel. Some of us might refer to that area as Palestine. The mission moved from Israel to North Africa. And those of you who are Bible students know that it began largely by persecution and the believers began to scatter. It settled in North Africa. The center of Christianity, if you like, or the center of gravity for Christian witness for Christianity settled in North Africa. But it was short-lived because of the challenge of Islam. And some of you students of history will know that evidently Christians began to be persecuted and they began to flee to the north. And a number of Christian scholars and writers, such as Athanasius, St. Augustine and others, though they were from Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, they found themselves writing and storing their Christian reflections in Rome. The Christian center of gravity settled in Rome for a period of time. And then, due to persecution again and other factors of doing mission, the center of gravity shifted into what we now have come to call the British Empire. So from North Africa to the Roman Empire, largely Italy, we go to the British Empire. In between here, for those of you of a strong evangelical rooting, the Reformation takes place, and the aftermath of the Reformation ushers the mission trend and the center of Christianity in the Roman Empire. You recall that in the late 50s and early 60s, the largest contingent of missionaries were coming from the British Empire. Then we crossed the Atlantic. Again, one of the contributing factors was the persecution of the free evangelical missionaries or Christians who settled in the new lands of North America. In the recent past, we've had the largest contingent of missionaries coming from North America, beg your pardon. So the North American Empire would include Canada, would include the USA. And of late, it has been quite obvious that there are inklings and indications that the center of gravity for Christian witness has shifted from the North American Empire to the so-called global South, largely South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The trend of the shift of the center of gravity for Christian witness can only be attributed to the major assumed reality of God. All that I've briefly narrated in the interest of time has been done sovereignly by God, lovingly by God, deliberately and intentionally and carefully. So when the center of gravity moves from Jerusalem and Israel and the modern Palestine to North Africa, to the Roman Empire, to the British Empire, and North American Empire, now to the global South, it has all been done by God, who is sovereignly the owner of mission. And so as we ask about the harvest in Africa, I want us to pay close attention that a number of changes have taken place. And these changes we must pay close attention to. There are some apparent contextual realities that we must pay attention to as we observe the movement, the mission movement. When the center of gravity was in the global North, allow me to use that collectively of British Empire, Roman Empire, and North American Empire, the intellectual center was in the North. This is where knowledge was taught and expanded. The economic center was in the North. The military center was in the North. The political center was in the North. These four realities, intellectual, economic, and military and political, formed the context under which the mission enterprise was developing, was being demonstrated, was being dispersed, if you like. The empires facilitated the move, the mission movement, because the believers in these empires were riding on the wave of the economic, political, intellectual, and military successes of this context. Of immediate interest would be the American Empire, the North American Empire. Today, we have the largest formally sent missionaries from North America. But it does seem quite evident that the shift is in the global South. There are apparent realities in our context, friends. South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Economic realities that sometimes look compromised. Something I'm referring to as compromised commerce. It's not easy to describe that or to define it because it has complexities of exploitation, complexities of work ethic, complexities of identity, with chronic economic disabilities. There are also in the global South and Africa in particular, political realities. It's a contaminated system, traditional and global interaction, Western democracy being embraced or not embraced, or in some cases contextualized. There are intellectual realities in the global South and Africa in particular. I'm referring to this as a convoluted illiteracy because we will need to discuss what we mean by its depravity or disorganization. The major reality in all this is that God remains sovereignly, lovingly, deliberately, and intentionally and carefully positioning his mission wherever he so wishes. There is definitely apparent emergence. There is definitely apparent significance. There is a decrease in witness in the global South. There is an increase in witness in the global South. Demographic indications show that there are fewer believers in the North compared to the global South. Strategic indicators of those who remain engaged also tell us almost the same thing. The increase in the global South is evident as the global South has now transitioned from merely a mission field to a mission force. It has transitioned from a planted church to a major church planter, not only on the continents, but the world globally. Once regarded as a daughter church, it stands in its own right as a sister church to any global church. It was once regarded as an infant church, but it is a growing church, and there is evidence for that. Once regarded as a minor church, it is a majority church. With the readiness and receptivity of the gospel in Africa being so abundant, being so obvious, we will need to give some thought to how we handle the Western mission models and structures and ask ourselves, would we be able to adopt, adapt, revise what has been handed over or presented as Western mission models and structures? We will need here in Africa, with the readiness of the harvest, learn to handle religious pluralism. Perhaps our neighbors in Southeast Asia will lend us some lessons. The socioeconomic vices that we have impact on what we may think about in terms of the harvest on the African continent. There are some biblical and unbiblical practices of church and mission on our continent. We cannot ignore these. But friends, there's great potential in Africa today on which we could possibly capitalize. Let's think about our African worship. Underrated, but yet authentic. Can we think about African worship as a bridge for mission in Africa? The passionate African preaching. Can we think of biblically reflecting and anchoring this approach to preaching as a bridge to enhance mission in Africa? The robust African fellowship, rooted and entrenched in its own culture of a collectivistic society. Could we think through and reflect and wrestle with the pros and cons of adapting our own cultural belonging and identity in demonstrating a church that is accommodating, accepting? What about African spirituality? Could this be a bridge that would enhance mission strategy in Africa? As we think of the African mission harvest, I want us to think of positioning ourselves not only to be inward looking, but to realize that perhaps God in this season is setting apart his church in Africa to be part of the global church and take its gospel to the ends of the earth as much as to its own continent. But we have a task, friends, to be reflective practitioners of mission. Are we going to continue or discontinue mission strategy? Will there be continuity or discontinuity? It seems, friends, we will need to think about whether or not and the place of complementing rather than competing, because we must embrace what has been referred to already from the whole church to the whole world. We must be ready to anchor our philosophy of ministry in the authority and sufficiency of Scripture. I want to challenge us to think about our identity on the global mission platform. Race and racism in mission will need to be something that we will need to wrestle with. The place and promotion of the gospel, the only true gospel, will need to be able to be placed center stage when we in Africa are indebted by prosperity, so-called prosperity gospel in a so-called poor continent. We will need to wrestle with formal and informal mission. The Africans in the diaspora have impacted, influenced, and effectively changed the trend of mission worldwide. We can ride on those tensions or potential tensions and potential areas of interest. We have a responsibility, brothers and sisters, firstly, to embrace global mission. with a positive biblical identity. We will need to engage the global church and the global world with substantial biblical knowledge and the knowledge of the world we live in. We will need to seek to not only empower ourselves and equip ourselves for the mission of God in Africa and the world, but we must position ourselves too as those that are empowered to empower the global church. There will be need for exchange, mutual exchange in the spirit of the whole church to the whole world. The Lord has done a new thing. The Lord has done great things in Africa today and in the church. We have been enlightened. I hope and pray that we will position ourselves with courage and conviction of both knowledge and experience to engage and enlighten the church in Africa. We have been known to be a mission field. In spite of the shift of the center of gravity of Christian witness from the global north to the global south, most of our churches are less than missional in philosophy, less than missional in practice. Having said that, we have very many examples in Africa of churches that have embraced the mission movement, are planting churches by the day, by the week, by the month, in ways that we have not seen in the history of missions. My task was to remind us where we have come from historically, where we are globally. The potential that is before us is huge. And let's remind ourselves of the God factor in positioning ourselves as a mission force. Yes, we will remain a mission field until Christ comes. But wherever the center of gravity for Christian witness has been, there has been a mission movement. And intellectually, the theologizing of the Christian faith has taken place where that center of gravity has been. Think of the Roman Empire. Think of the British Empire. Think of North American Empire. Wherever the center of gravity for Christian witness has been, there we've had the center for theologizing, the center for missionizing, the center for developing of the church. If indeed the center of gravity has shifted from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, I want to reckon that Africa is at the center of that shift. The privilege and the blessing comes with responsibility. I hope I've given us enough to wrestle with, enough to think about. And once again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this initial presentation.